The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. My name is Jen Spiker and today I'll continue highlighting a video from the recent Answers in Genesis Living in Babylon Australian tour. Over 10 days, Ken Ham and Martin Iles visited Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth and Melbourne. They shared a series of messages exploring the idea that we live in a modern-day equivalent of Babylon. Today we'll hear more of Martin Iles' first message to a capacity crowd in Adelaide, describing what we can learn from the story of Israel's exile to Babylon, found in the book of Daniel.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
Babylon, it's proud, it's rebellious, it's anxious. There's two little things I want to mention before I move on about how it affects our experience as people who serve the true God. And the first thing is that it is hostile. Babylon is a culture that is hostile to those who serve God. It says in Revelation, concerning that last Babylon, it says that she is drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. She is going after them. And it's interesting, it's not that the Babylons of this world are hostile to everything Christianity stands for. You can say God loves you and no one minds. And it's true. Although, the fact is that he has loved us in a certain manner, which is that while we were yet sinners, this is how God demonstrates his love towards us in that, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. That's his love. It's not that he feels all warm and fuzzy and squishy towards us all the time. We are sinners. We do rebel. But he has done an incredible act of love towards us all. Now you can say that and it's not such a big problem. But what is the problem is when you start to say things about a God who has something to say about Babylon's idols. It's interesting today, really the problem comes when you bear testimony to a creator God who has something to say about all the things that we are trying to grasp by our own power, pretending that we are the creators. It's all the things I talked about already. Why do you think these are so seldom talked about? Because these are the things that raise Babylon's hostility. Because you are poking Babylon's idols when you say that God has a design for human sexuality. God created male and female. God has the destiny of the planet in his hand. When you say all this unbelievably incendiary stuff in our culture. It's all true, but the reason it's hated is because the hostility of Babylon comes against her idols. But also people say to me very often, they say, do you think that this hostility is going to get worse in our day? If this is the way these sort of anti-God cultures go, do you think the hostility is going to get worse? And the short answer is actually, I don't really know. Because Babylon doesn't necessarily bludgeon us into submission. It doesn't necessarily give us an actual fiery furnace to be thrown into by a megalomaniac. I mean, that hasn't happened. Because there's another tool in the arsenal. And the tool is seduction. Babylon is a very good time. It's a prosperous and it's a powerful culture. And one of the things about all those cultures that are called Babylon in Scripture is that prosperity and wealth and a good life is available to the common man. That's not normal in history. The elites can. But it's interesting in the West, most people have access to something to have a good time and a good life. Most people have some bread and circuses. And when people are prospering, when people are fat and happy and comfortable, when people have a wide social circle and a peaceful life and a career and respectability, they forget about God. Babylon is one. And here's the thing, Babylon says you can keep enjoying all that, so long as you don't colour outside the lines of our culture. So long as you don't say all those things you just said, you can have all of that. And see how we're seduced? We go quiet because we know what the cost is. And she seduced us. And in Revelation, that's why she's depicted as a great prostitute, and it goes into some detail there. And finally, remember this, Babylon ends. It's a culture that is judged. It will be brought down from its pride and destroyed by the hand of God himself. That happened to the city of Babel. The pride gets to a certain point, the damage gets to a certain point, and God says, justice is better than mercy. It's time to end it. It happened to Babylon in Daniel's day. Daniel 5, I'll be speaking about that in Brisbane. It always happens. So in summary, these are cultures that show human pride, rebellion against God, anxiety, hostility to the people of God, seduction of the people of God, and they are judged. In Daniel 3, we're confronted with Babylon's pride first and foremost. And it's actually a pride which we find shocking. It's manifested by Nebuchadnezzar himself, and this man is making himself God. And he's a man of unpredictable and vicious violence and megalomania. And now he's demanding people's worship. Now, he sets up a golden image. Is it a golden image of himself? We don't know, but he's still demanding to control people's worship. Whatever Nebuchadnezzar did and said was the law of the land. There was no rule of law in those days like we have today, where even the government is supposed to be subject to the law. Not in Nebuchadnezzar's day. Whatever he said was the law. It's interesting actually on that. This is a siding, but I'll say it. With Darius, it's interesting, he signs a decree, and then he can't defy the decree that he signed, even though he's the king. Because Medo-Persia did have somewhat of a rule of law system. It's very interesting when the historians find that out, and you go and look at the Bible, there's always these little details. Make you go, oh, I didn't realize when I was a kid, I wondered why Darius just didn't do what he wanted. And we're like, no, I'm not throwing him in the lion's den. He couldn't. He was subject to his own law. Anyway, just an interesting aside. There's much like that in the book of Daniel. Details that just, for example, they always said there was no King Belshazzar. He didn't exist. Until, of course, there was an archaeological discovery in which it was all about King Belshazzar. And then they said, well, he wasn't the king. He was the prince. But then they realized that actually the king Nabonidus went to Egypt and appointed Belshazzar as co-regent in his place. And see, the detail that's relevant in Daniel 5 is that he says to Daniel, you'll be the third ruler in the kingdom. Not the second, because he can't give that away. He's the second. You're the third. Little details all the way through. Anyway, slight aside. Back to Nebuchadnezzar, pride. He's got a kind of the king is God level of unvarnished pride. And we look at that and it sort of takes our breath away and we shake our heads. But the fact is, pride is in the fabric of our modern day Babylon as well, even if it's different in its manifestation. We are still reaching up to the throne of God into heaven in our day to take control of things that only God has control of. And it's not merely the king that's doing it and imposing it on the people. The whole culture is doing it with one accord. That's the difference. We've individualized the ethos of Babel. Come, let us make a name for ourselves. We've made that our personal creed. What do I mean? Well, we live in a culture where, just think about this. People say, really? Is that true? Well, let's start here. Let's start with the fact that we live in a culture where it is possible to have many colourful, celebratory parades and festivals in all our cities, which take place under a banner which literally says what? Pride. Literally. Pride is a movement. Pride is a brand. Pride is a good time. Pride is life advice. Pride is marketing. Pride is exalted among the people as a virtue. And when you say it that bluntly, it's rather confronting. It's almost as confronting to people in other generations as what Nebuchadnezzar did, isn't it? It's almost as crazy to take pride, a dreadful sin, and turn it into this. Our pride is no less wicked than Nebuchadnezzar's because it is also a pride of defiance against God. It is a pride which ultimately makes this call: whatever God has said, it must give way to who I say that I am. And we've set up a pantheon of golden images today, to which we are all expected to bow. It's a series of golden images which are images erected to reverence of our identities. It's interesting, you look at the legal system. It was once the case in Western cultures like Australia where we had blasphemy laws. You couldn't insult God. It was illegal. And there's a whole debate about whether they should come back. I'm not getting into that, I'm not sure. But the fact is, today, we don't have those. But we have vilification laws, which really makes it a crime to insult or blaspheme someone's identity. That's where we are. Images are identity-based images, and everybody knows, especially if it's the golden LGBTQ, everybody knows that if you don't bow, it's not going to be a great time. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that someone's going to get real angry real quick. Sort of the social code that we're currently living in. I just had my first book published, as I mentioned, Who Am I? And I make an observation. We live in days when the foundation from which we live our lives tends to be ourselves. It's easy for me. I pointed at the movement that marches under the banner of pride to make a point, but I don't want us to be happy to stop there. I don't want to just point out of ourselves. Actually, that movement didn't become so socially acceptable in a vacuum. It became socially acceptable in a cultural soup that made it possible. A cultural soup in which we are all living, which threatens to shape us all. A culture which I call, an idea which I call the identity theory of life, which starts with the question, who am I? Go to a government primary school, they're asking it pretty early. Or elementary school, if anyone from America watches this. We answer that question by means of an inward look, looking at ourselves. We dig around in our internal psychology to come up with answers. Once we have those answers, we say, well, this is just who I am. And we tailor every aspect of our lives to complement ourselves. We pursue a life that is made in our own image. My career choice stems out of who I am. My marriage partner is about completing me. My spare time is me time. Me first. Others and God last. I do what's right for me rather than actually bending my will to submit to what is right or even admitting what is right. I create my truth rather than submit myself to the truth. Even church is a space for me. I go there to get my spiritual needs met. And we start hearing language. I don't know if you've heard this one. I've heard it a few times now. That I need to feel seen. I need to feel seen. In other words, the world needs to revolve around me. Life is about being my best self. In other words, it's all about me.
This is The Spotlight, and we've been hearing Martyn Iles in part of a series of messages shared during the recent Answers in Genesis Living in Babylon Australian tour. As Martyn says, Babylon is more relevant now than ever. I'm Jen Spiker, and next time on The Spotlight, we'll hear more of the message that Martyn shared to a capacity crowd at the Adelaide Convention Centre. If you can't wait and want to watch Martyn's message in full, you can do that right now in the Free Vision app. Just tap the Watch tab and scroll to the Living in Babylon Australian Tour channel for this and more talks in this series.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the Free Vision app.